All right, good morning. My name is Robert Jones. This is my demonstration speech this morning. I would like to show off my audience. Before we begin, there are 6 lovely volunteers to help out. All right, let's begin. All right, good morning. As mentioned before, my name is Robert Jones. Today we're going to be discussing kind of U.S.-China relations and how it seems to be that there is an inevitable conclusion in which the story of China and the United States is coming to. And unfortunately, that inevitable conclusion will be a war at some point. A war consisting of mostly naval and air powers. This morning, we're kind of talking about what has escalated us to that point. Some events over the last 5 to 6 years that have pushed us pretty close to the brink, closer than probably most people realize because they're not commonly reported on events, as well as what are some things that force this inevitable event to happen. So first, we need to kind of understand why China is this way. Why China seems to be kind of a force to be reckoned with. Most people would argue there's only one true superpower in the world, the United States. Some people would argue there are 2 true superpowers, the United States and Russia. However, I fall into a camp that says that there are 3 true superpowers in the world, the United States, Russia, and China. China has evolved rapidly from the 20th century. They have been a country that has existed for millennia at this point, and they have consistently and constantly been in war. We're all familiar with all the different dynasties, and everyone's seen the movie Mulan, where the Huns invade China. This is the kind of world in which they lived in up until the late 19th, early 20th century. The United States got involved in Japan. We kind of helped start to modernize Japan a little bit. They took that military opportunity and then proceeded to invade China twice over a course of about 60 years. Post-World War II, China was basically tired of being beat up upon by other Pacific nations, specifically Japan. So they adopted kind of a Soviet mindset, became a communist country. They saw that Russia was rapidly moving into the 20th century and rapidly becoming an equal to the United States, and they followed their model. Basically, if you're going to push me, I'm going to push back even harder. So they became a communist nation that with a very large focus upon increasing their technological advancements, both in the public and private sector. Their military has rapidly grown, quickly becoming one of, if not the second most advanced military in the world. Now, there are a couple of areas within and around China that create a perfect pocket, basically, for a war to escalate or for a war to become reality. And the first one we're going to talk about is called the Scarborough Shoals and the Spratly Islands. So it's a pretty small map here, but there's this tiny little spot here called Scarborough, which is basically a reef in the shape of a circle. And the Philippines make claim to the reef, but so do the Chinese, so do the Taiwanese, and a couple of other small, the Vietnamese. There's a few other small island nations that also make claim to the Scarborough Shoal because it is a natural resource gold mine. Like we talked about, China evolved rapidly in the 20th century, and one thing they could not keep up with was their population. Population just exploded through the 20th century, and they are unable of producing enough natural resources to help provide for that massive population, meaning they don't produce enough oil to put gas in their cars. They don't produce enough food to feed their citizens. They don't have the resources capable, because most of China is a desert, to help provide for these people. So their only way to do it is through the water. They eat a lot of fish. They drill in the South China Sea. So every piece of land, every square nautical mile is extremely important for them. So the Scarborough Shoal is very, very small, but it has a ton of fish. And it has, as we recently found out, a ton of oil in it. So the Philippines are one day monitoring their little private oasis, and they notice that there is Chinese fishing vessels located within the shoal. And they say, this is no good. They send out the Filipino Navy. This is April of 2012. They send out the Filipino Navy, and the Filipino Navy basically escorts the fishing vessels out. Well, the very next day, China responds with more fishing vessels and the Chinese Coast Guard. And over the course of the next 3 weeks to really 2 months, every day, it just kept getting more and more. And there were even skirmishes where they were within feet of each other, a Chinese naval vessel and a Filipino naval vessel. And had they simply just accidentally collided, one of the two nations, most likely China, probably would have counted it as an act of war. and could have caused for some sort of escalation of violence within the South China Sea. Now, all these other countries are united against China within this area. So, like, countries that have claims to the Spratly Islands here would have supported the Philippines' claim on the Scarborough Shoal. So they also would have been against China. The Vietnamese, for example, would have stood up against China. Even though they're a communist country, they don't like to be bullied on by such a larger nation. The second event that we kind of are on the precipice of happening is a Taiwanese scenario. The nation of Taiwan, which considers itself the true nation of China, their real name is the Republic of China, though we call them Taiwan. They are a democratic nation in a basically little brother scenario with an extremely powerful and much larger communist nation of China. And China wants Taiwan. It wants Taiwan bad. It wants Taiwan like it wanted Hong Kong. It eventually will try to make claim for this small island nation. It's only 70 nautical miles between China and Taiwan, and it's kind of a beacon of democratic freedom to the Chinese people. That's why they want it gone away. They don't want anyone saying, hey, you can come over here, life's a lot better. You can still be Chinese, but you can have all the freedoms in the world. China doesn't like that. So the best way to do it is, hey, let's come over here. Let's kind of squish their little government. The Taiwanese are doing a ton of trade with westernized countries. They're making a ton of money. Let's start stealing that trade. Let's start stealing that money. Let's make claim to this little island. The United States desperately wants a democratic kind of beacon within the nation of China. We want something for the Chinese people to follow and say, hey, we want to be a part of that. That sounds like something that we would really do well. We could improve our lifestyles. We desperately want the same freedoms that the people of Taiwan have. So what does all that have to do with the United States? We talked about Spratlys, we talked about Scarborough Shoals, and we talked about Taiwan, and none of that being like, they all seem kind of like isolated little events or isolated countries that there seems to be little value in protecting them. And we could argue back and forth on whether or not they deserve to be protected. However, now we have constitutional mandates that force us to protect these countries. After World War II, basically, every nation in the world decided some sort of treaty organization needs to exist. We saw the creation of the UN. We saw the creation of NATO. We've seen the creation of the EU in the last 20 years. And we, on a side note, could be seeing the fall of the EU right now. But one thing we did was we set up a lot of defense treaties with countries all over the world, really to protect democratic assets and stop the rise of communism. Here I have a list of base treaties that were all made in 1954. There are 7 treaties listed, 5 of which all take place in the Pacific Ocean. Because even then, 70 years ago, we realized the Pacific Ocean is the battle space of the future. It will inevitably pop off. It is drastically different than the wars we have been fighting. It's drastically different than the wars we have fought. And we need to be prepared for what is going to happen. Now, something like the Southeast Asia Treaty will protect the Scarborough Shoals. It protects our interest in the Philippines. It says, dear Philippines, if you decide you're going to go to war with China, we got your back. We actually did send a carrier battle group to the Scarborough Shoal to help kind of mitigate and control that from escalating anymore. Had the U.S. not been there, that could have actually grown into some sort of military operation. Now, Taiwan, not listed on any of these treaties, because we had it's called the U.S. ROC Treaty, Republic of China, and it actually expired in 1980. But Jimmy Carter was president. He wasn't seeking to renew the treaty, so Congress passed an act, a law, called the Taiwan Relationship Act of 1979 as kind of a way to maneuver around the president not renewing the treaty and saying, hey, well, if you're not going to protect Taiwan, we're going to make a congressional act that you have to protect Taiwan. And so, since 1979, now it is federal law. If the Chinese were to invade Taiwan, we have to go protect them. So what does all that have an effect? What is the effect it has in the United States? Well, number one, global economies would crash because the United States and China are the 2 largest buyers, sellers, traders, producers of everything in the world. We buy all of their stuff, they buy all of our stuff. Both economies would collapse. You're talking about, truthfully, you can't count the amount of people that are at risk of dying especially here on the island of Taiwan, within about 72 hours you're talking about. 70 nautical miles, 72 hours, China probably can have full control of the island. How does the United States get there in time? Well, we don't know if we can. We know that we're supposed to protect them, but we don't know if we can. We don't know the kind of lives that would be lost in trying to take that island. We're talking about Scarborough Shoal. You're talking about civilian lives. If we're talking about civilian fishermen, civilian oil riggers, they're going to be in the middle of a naval and air battle space between the Chinese and the Philippines and the Vietnamese. There is very little that we can control in these scenarios. What is very important is that we recognize that these scenarios exist, and we do important steps to help mitigate any sort of possible damage from ever happening. I say it's inevitable because it's hard to have two powers have such influence in the world. Eventually, one must fall. The question is, how does it fall, and how does the other country respond? My hope and prayer is that maybe Taiwan has some of that democratic influence in China, and that those people start to realize that democracy is a good thing, and that communism cannot last. That they take control of their own government, and we develop a U.S.-Chinese relationship that will be a beacon for the rest of the world to follow. Our only hope in protecting and preventing these actions is to support the Chinese people, to support our allies in the South China Sea, and to take whatever steps necessary to help prevent all-out war from happening. Because truthfully, this could be the precipice for World War III. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great day. Oh no!